struck the right balance.
One of those instruments is something called derivatives.
Right.
Now, you're going to regulate some or oversee some, but most of the complex ones will still be traded privately. Why shouldn't all trades in this multi-trillion-dollar market, which caused such problems, why shouldn't it be publicly regulated on exchanges?
Well, I don't want to completely step on my story for tomorrow when I announce the details of our plan. But let me say this. Derivatives are a huge potential risk to the system. We are going to make sure that they have to register, that they are regulated, that you have clearinghouses so that everybody knows what people's various positions are. Right now, you've got an entire shadow system of enormous risk. That's all going to be brought to the surface, and we believe that transparency and openness is the key step in making sure that they're not posing a risk to the system as a whole.
You give greater power to the Federal Reserve, which failed to spot troubles at Citi and Bank of America. Despite that, does that indicate you have full confidence in Ben Bernanke?
Well, first of all, I think Ben Bernanke has done an extraordinary job under extraordinary circumstances. Point number two is we have to have somebody who is responsible for seeing the risks of the system as a whole and not just individual institutions. And we think that the Fed is best positioned to do that. Now, it already has some of that power, but it doesn't have all of it. The other thing that it's lacking right now is the resolution authority, so that when a single institution like an AIG breaks down or a bank holding company breaks down, there's an ability to unwind that individual institution without bringing down the entire system as a whole. And so in some cases we're expanding modestly the Fed's powers. In other circumstances we're actually going to relieve them of some responsibilities, for example on the consumer side, as I just discussed, so that somebody has line responsibility just to focus on making sure that consumers are protected.
With that effusive praise of Chairman Bernanke, you want to tell us now you're going to reappoint him?
I'm not making news on that today.
You're not? Shucks, we tried. Let me ask you about one question about the economy. Are you worried that the rise in Treasury bond yields will undermine the housing market and the economic recovery? Does that suggest that Chinese and other investors are losing confidence?
No, I think what you've seen is that for a while there was a flight to treasuries because people were so risk averse. They were fearful that the economy was falling off a cliff. Now, ironically, what you've seen is as people are more confident that we may have avoided the very worst scenarios, people have a greater appetite for risk, which means that there's going to be money flowing out of treasuries, and people are going to start putting money in other investments that provide higher yields. And you know, that also means that yields on treasuries are going to go up. I am concerned about the long-term issue of our structural deficit and our long-term debt, because if we don't get a handle on that, then there's no doubt that at some point, you know, whether it's the Chinese, the Koreans, the Japanese, whoever else has been snatching up treasuries, are going to decide that this is too much of a risk. And so that's why it's so important for us to get a handle on our long-term structural deficit. And the key to that, as I've been discussing over the last several weeks, is healthcare reform. That's the single biggest driver of our federal deficit. If we don't get a handle on that, we're not going to get a handle on
I'll ask you one
these problems
healthcare
generally.
question in a minute, Mr. President, but talking about that deficit, with the changed circumstances, can you still promise that when you address that, as you are addressing that, CBO projects $5.5 trillion over the next 5 years, that 95% of taxpayers will not have to pay higher taxes?
I have said repeatedly that, first of all, we inherited a $1.3 trillion deficit, and we've got a structural deficit that has to be closed. We knew we were going to have to take some extraordinary steps to deal with this recession, and that's what we've been doing. But the long-term problem hasn't gone away. If my proposals are adopted, then not only are we cutting the deficit in half compared to where it would be if we didn't do anything, but we're also going to be able to raise revenue on people making over $250,000 a year in a modest way. That helps close the deficit. The Medicare changes that we've suggested, and the greater efficiencies that we've had, for example, on defense procurement. All those things, I think, can help contribute to driving the deficit down. So I'm confident that we don't have to raise taxes on ordinary working families.
95% of Americans.
That's my belief.
Okay.
But obviously, one of the biggest variables in this whole thing is economic growth.
Right.
And that's why, if we're serious about energy reform, if we're serious about healthcare reform, if we improve our education system, if we are growing at a robust rate, then we can pay for the government that we need without having to raise taxes. If we've got anemic growth, if we don't have a strategy for recovery without bubbles, which is essentially what we've had over the last couple of recovery cycles, then we're going to continue to have problems.
Do you think unemployment will reach 10%?
Yes.
You do this year?
Yes. I think that what you've seen is that the pace of job loss has slowed, and I think that the economy is going to turn around, but as you know, jobs are a lagging indicator, and we've got to produce 150,000 jobs every month just to keep pace, just to flatten this out.
So when will it start to come down?
Well, if I had a crystal ball, then I probably would have made a lot of money before I became president. I didn't. But I do think that you're starting to see the engines of the economy turn. It's going to take a long time. We had a huge deleveraging that took place, but I'm confident that if we take the steps that are necessary on healthcare, on energy, on education, if we get a strong financial regulatory system in place so that people have confidence in the markets again, that we will end up seeing recovery shortly.
You've mentioned the centrality of health care several times. Tom Daschle, Bob Dole, and Howard Baker tomorrow will propose to eliminate the tax deductibility for the richest part of employer health care plans. You've opposed that, but if that were to help get a bill, could you accept it?
Well, what I've said is that we have to control costs, and that means using tools like comparative effectiveness, which is a very simple concept. You see those healthcare systems in those communities that are able to provide high quality and low cost, and you say, let's duplicate what they're doing instead of the folks who are spending a lot of money for low quality healthcare. I think that it's going to be important for us to institute health IT and prevention. I think that if we change some of the incentives in terms of how doctors and hospitals and providers are reimbursed, we can wring out a lot of inefficiencies in the system. If we do all those things, I've put forward enough both cost savings and mechanisms to raise revenues. For example, reducing the itemization of deductions back to where they were under Ronald Reagan. I think that's the better way to do it. Now, Congress is having a vigorous debate on the Hill, and I don't want to predetermine the best way to do this. I've already put forward what I think is the best way, but let me see what comes out of the Hill, and we'll have that debate then.
Final question. After everything that's happened, do you think Wall Street gets it?
You know, I think that Wall Street seems to maybe have a shorter memory about how close we were to the abyss than I would have expected. When I hear some of the commentary that's been creeping up about, you know, it's time for government to get out of the economy and what's the Obama administration doing, I have to try to remind them all we're doing is cleaning up after the mess that was made. And as soon as this economy has stabilized, we want the free market to do what it does best, and that is produce jobs, invest. There are tons of great business opportunities that are out there that I think Americans are eager to take advantage of. But what I do think everybody should understand is that we now need some sensible rules of the road so that people aren't taking exorbitant risks that pose system-wide risks to the financial system, that when it comes to issues like executive compensation, shareholders should know what management is giving themselves so that their interests are properly aligned. We think that it makes sense for consumers to know what they're getting into when they sign up for a credit card or a subprime loan, that credit agencies aren't self-interested when they're rating securitized products. So there are just a bunch of common sense reforms that I think we can make, and as soon as we get those in place, I am eager to make sure that we can refocus our attention on long-term challenges like improving our school system or our healthcare system. That should be the subject of my administration's attention.
Mr. President, thank you very much. I hope we can do it again.
I look forward to it.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Al.